I think it's important to discuss what I think was the original cardinal sin of this entire thing, of this entire era of Bulls basketball, having the 4 straight top 7 picks or whatever it was. It was 3 7th overalls and then 1 number 4, right?
Correct.
There is one big cardinal sin that I think failed this, and it's not the Vucevic trade, but I think that this immediately led to the Vucevic trade. It's letting Jim Boylen be the coach of this team for 2 years. Because Jim Boylen was the coach of this team for 2 years, 2 of those back-to-back 7th overall picks never got a chance to develop because Jim Boylen was busy developing this bench. And because of that, they didn't get enough of an evaluation on Wendell Carter and Lauri Markkanen to know just how good these guys are. And because of that, you end up in a situation where you then allow Lauri to leave in a trade where they get back 1 late first round pick. It's going to be basically
Portland's lottery protected first round pick. So they get that pick if Portland makes the playoffs at any point in the next 3-4 years.
Right. And then you move Wendell Carter in a deal for Nikola Vucevic. I would just straight up rather have Wendell Carter as a player, let alone the Franz Wagner pick, let alone the other pick that's forthcoming, right?
Not poor protected, I mean brutal.
All of these things, I think, stem from letting Jim Boylen coach this team for 2 years and worry about developing this bench versus developing actual dudes that are good. So everything from there, I think, is snowballed. And this is why this fucking sucks for Bulls fans, because they had a 4-year run where they had 4 top 7 picks. They had 4 of them. And because they didn't have a coach that knew what he was doing, they're now in a position where they have to restart this rebuild. And when I say like restart the rebuild, I don't think they need to like full scale tear it down to studs. Like I'm not at all going to say that. But they need to do quite a bit of work here, I think, to make up for where they are. And ultimately, I think that keeping Boylen for 2 years led to the Vucevic deal because they didn't know who Wendell Carter was and how good he was, and that they didn't need Vucevic. And then they would have these 2 other picks that could have been Franz Wagner, could have been someone else, who knows, right? Very easily could have been Franz Wagner, teams like Franz Wagner. It could have been something like you have Wendell Carter, who's just as good as Vucevic. You have someone like Franz Wagner. Then you have all these guys. Getting Vucevic doesn't stop you from signing DeMar DeRozan, right? Like maybe DeMar doesn't sign there, but I'd rather have all the picks and Wendell Carter than DeMar, as great as DeMar has been, because DeMar now, if Vucevic leaves in the offseason via free agency, which is the biggest part of this, the timeline is ticking on this core. He doesn't fit the age timeline anymore of what this team, of when this team should be competing. So this has always been the biggest issue with the Bulls' decision-making to do this, right? It was you're mixing timelines together, hoping that Patrick Williams develops quick, hoping that Kobe White develops quick, hoping that maybe you get minutes out of Ayo Dosunmu where he's ready to go playoff rotation player from the jump right now. You're getting Alex Caruso. And like, I think that ultimately what this has led to is a situation where they're not really standing and competing for anything. They're not competent anymore because of the Lonzo injury. And they got really unlucky with the Lonzo injury. Like, let's just call that out too. It's incredibly unfortunate that Lonzo got hurt. But because they have to make decisions here coming up on DeMar DeRozan and Nikola Vucevic, it's very fucking hard for them to not make moves now in season that make them worse at basketball for the rest of this season and probably into next season.
Yeah. I think, the real first decision, like you talk about Boylen, But the thing to remember is that Boylen was John Paxson and Gar Forman's guy. He was really Paxson's guy. So then we bullied the Bulls into making Paxson fire himself. He did it. But he's still with the organization. He just basically got promoted into not having much power. The American dream, to be honest. Gar Forman did get fired, so they hire Arturas Karnisovas. And Karnisovas' first decision, in my opinion, was, are you going to trade Zach LaVine? He was like, 2 years away, then 1 year away from getting this big deal. The Bulls had already traded a superior player in Jimmy Butler, while he had 2 years of a very team-friendly contract remaining because they didn't want to pay him his next contract. Yeah. Well, I think that, first, Boylen was horrible, obviously. He's the worst coach I've ever seen. He was garbage.
I think he's genuinely the worst NBA coach of the decade. Like, if I was, like, really thinking back through it, I think he's the worst NBA coach of, like, since I've been covering basketball.
Yeah, no doubt. He's the worst I've seen as well over my time covering basketball. He was the worst at Utah when he was a college coach. He was the worst with the Bulls when he was a head coach in the NBA. But also, like, Markkanen and Carter, like, it just makes sense that dudes are better at, like, 24, 25 than they are at 19.
Totally.
When they were on the Bulls, they were 19, 20, 21. I think that Markkanen never really got better in his 4 years in Chicago. This is a different conversation, but...
and he got hurt as well. He continued to get hurt.
The Bulls never had a decent point guard with him to help him. And then Carter, like, they wouldn't even let him shoot. It was just ridiculous. When that was
the Carter one is worse than the Lowry Markkanen one. Like, the Carter one was just, you could see it happening as it was happening, that this guy had so much more skill than what they let him showcase. And they just never let him do anything. And it was just like, what are we doing
here? So they made the decision to build around LaVine. That was the key decision. And I think, like, when Karnisovas went into the job interview, he wasn't telling the Reinsdorfs, like, hey, we're going to be garbage for 4 more years, and I'm just going to pick better than Paxson and Foreman in the draft, and maybe we'll get luckier in the lottery. No, he told them, like, we're going to get back in the playoffs. You're going to get your playoff revenue. They told him, cool, just don't go into the luxury tax, because the Bulls never go into the luxury tax, despite being one of the most profitable franchises in all of sports, directly tied to the Jordan era, of course. So I think that was sort of their directive, like, build a playoff team, don't go into the luxury tax. Ideally, you are viewed as, like, a up-and-coming team that a bigger star wants to join. Yep. So I think that was the game plan. That the first move that triggered that was deciding they weren't going to trade LaVine. And if you could go back now, you would trade Zach LaVine. And Zach's still a good player. I don't want to make it seem like I'm, like, totally criticizing him. This season, he's not been very good. It's partially because his body broke down.
That's what I was going to say. Like, it's not Zach's fault that he's a bit worse now. Like, that's where, like, I do want to be careful and, like, give Zach LaVine, like, the credit he's due. It is unfortunate that his body has broken down in the way it has. And, like, thinking about it, like, from a team building perspective, I'm like reasonably okay with everything they've done since the Vucevic move. Like, I think that was a disaster and they never should have done that. And I think that ultimately you're right. Like, if I was running the team, I would have traded Zach. I don't even know if I would have traded Zach. I would have tried to re-sign him. If he wasn't willing to re-sign, I then would have probably traded him. I would have never made the Vucevic move. That was just insane. And I wrote that at the time. Just the level of assets they gave up for a guy that is someone that is difficult to make work on a playoff team, was always foolhardy in a lot of ways to me. But I am a big believer in making a decision on a direction and then sticking to that and trying to make it work until it no longer works, period. Right? So after they made the Vucevic decision, I don't really have a problem with anything else that they've done. Like, I don't really have a problem with you getting Vucevic, having Zach LaVine, and because you have those guys, you then go out and you sign DeMar DeRozan, Lonzo Ball, and Alex Caruso. Those are the guys that make sense to put with those guys. Right?
Honestly, all really good moves.
Yes, all of those moves have worked out. They drafted Ayo Dosunmu. Great move. Great second round pick. It worked. So, like, Pat Williams is maybe not like your commensurate number 4 overall pick. I'm sure they would rather have Tyrese Halliburton, but like, I think every team would rather have Tyrese Halliburton, right? And I had Tyrese ahead of Pat Williams in that draft, but nonetheless, like, Pat Williams was the late riser in that class. I think I also liked Isaac Okoro a little bit more than Pat Williams, and that was fucking wrong. So everyone gets these things right and everyone gets them wrong. They're incredibly difficult to judge. And NBA teams only have to pick one, and they pick Pat Williams. And we'll see where it goes from here. He got hurt last year and is, I think, still trying to find a role in a team that established roles without him.